we're going to kick it off, and I want to start by welcoming everybody to our December webinar. I'm really excited about tonight. I was lucky enough to see Jerica speak at another conference, and as soon as I saw her speak, I was like, I have to reach out. I have to find her on LinkedIn and invite her, and she brought one of her coworkers, so we're getting double the benefit here. So I'm really excited for tonight, but I just want to kick it off with a couple quick announcements. One, if you are a current student, remember that spring registration is going on. If you have not already registered for your classes, we've got a couple electives offered next semester, including my non-medical obstacles class. We also have some core classes like our critical infrastructure class. So if you have not already registered, please make sure that you do that. Second, there is going to be no January webinar. We're going to still be on winter break for the first Wednesday, so we will kick it off with our spring semester on February 1st. I will be sending out the flyers and the schedule with all that information, so please look for that. I am getting confirmation on this, but we should be having an IAEM meeting on December 13th. If you are not on the our IAEM mailing list, you can go to this website that's going to be in the chat and look at the schedule, the updated information. You can also get on the mailing list there, or you can email JD at that email address right there and ask him to be included in all of our meeting communications. Last thing is we always open up our school store in the spring, so that way we can people who are graduating can kind of stock up before graduation. It does take a little while to get your stuff back, so we will probably be sending an email out about that in January, at the end of January. So as you're kicking off next semester, please be looking for that. You can get yourself some cool public health preparedness swag. And for those of you who have already been here through a couple iterations of the store, if there's anything that's in there that is not in there that you would like to see, please just let me know and we can talk to the company and have it added. So that is all that I have for right now. So what I am going to do is introduce our two speakers. As I mentioned, I saw Jerica at a conference and reached out to her. So she is the Chief of Staff at the Washington, D.C. Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, and she sees a lot of the critical admin functions of the organization, so the finance, HR, things like that. And she also oversees the Resilience Bureau, which takes care of the district's Resilience DC plan and hazard mitigation. She's been there for about 12 years, and she's served in several EOC positions through a number of events and incidents. She's done COVID, NSSEs, First Amendment issues, weather crises, and also she was there on January 6th. And when I reached out to her, she asked if she could bring Melissa, who is her Chief Resilience Officer at the agency. And Melissa leads efforts to ensure the district can thrive in a changing world by pushing forward policies that address shocks like hurricanes, economic things, pandemics, and chronic stressors. So things like your affordable housing, stressed infrastructure, and inequality. And it's really interesting to have both of them here at the same time because Jerica's been here for 12 years, so she can kind of talk about the longevity in her position, but Melissa has come to the agency just recently, so she can provide that new perspective. And she was working on climate change and was with the district's Department of Energy and Environment. So we get two really great perspectives. And they are also, I know that a number of people here are talking about getting into emergency management. So they are ready to answer questions about that. So please get your questions ready. They're going to give a quick presentation and then we'll open it up. So if you want to unmute and ask them a question, just raise your hand. If not, put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and I can ask it for you. So Jerica, Melissa, thank you again for giving up your Wednesday night to speak with us. And we are really, really happy to have you here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited about the talk. I'll actually sort of just kick off very quickly and then hand it over to Melissa. I know that she put together, I think, a few slides and some sort of visual things just to sort of set the tone for the resilient DC strategy. But I know that when we talked about this, we first kind of talked about the intersection between public health and emergency management. And it's very interesting during COVID to see how many different sort of states, counties, localities have vastly different experiences with the interactions between their public health officials and their emergency management shops. In the district, we're really fortunate that we work with the Department of Health, and they have an emergency preparedness and response team at the health department, which is called HEPRA at DC Health, which we work with for all incidents, all threats and hazards all the time. They're at all our First Amendment event activations, NSSEs. They're there for, our festivals and all the things that are happening in the district on a daily basis. And we have a really close working relationship with them. Leading into COVID, they had already started to stand up based on some of the health alerts and warnings that were starting to kick up about COVID-19. And they were meeting with folks at HCEMA on a weekly basis as early as, I think, early January, about the talk of COVID and the conversations of what that might look like, and engaging with us really early. One unique thing about our activation compared to maybe some other emergency management shops is we were in person the entire time from day one, and we actually moved our EOC to the health department. And if you've ever been to EOCs, they're usually pretty sort of set up places that have a lot of monitors and screens, and they're designed to be an operations center. And we picked up our laptops and some rolling WebEx boards, and we moved them to the health department. And we're there with them for almost 8 months before we finally went back to our agency. And I think, it was a health emergency, so it was important that we could be close to the team, the epidemiologists, and all the folks that were really driving some of the data and the information that we were tracking. But I think it is also indicative of how great it was to be able to have the health department open their doors to us, and us to be able to work collaboratively in a very stressful environment in their space for such a long time, and have it be a really productive relationship. Coming air quote out of COVID, we still maintain that closeness with them, and it's probably gotten even stronger since we both sort of understand the tugs and pulls that each of our agencies experience during different types of emergencies. And so I have a lot of, sort of ideas of how these two worlds can and should merge. And I'll turn it over to Melissa to talk about some of the forward-leaning sort of strategic and planning things that the district is considering and takes in consideration on a day-to-day basis, but especially when we get into emergency response.
Yeah, thank you, Jerica. And I'll actually say a little bit of how I got into HCEMA was that when COVID happened, HCEMA and other agencies asked for folks to raise their hands from across district government to come and help with the COVID response. And I was one of the people that raised my hand. And even though I was working for a district Department of Energy and Environment, I came over and sat at the health department with all of the HCEMA employees and worked on thinking about long-term recovery planning. And then from that, really got to know the team over at HCEMA. And so moving over officially into my new role just felt like a natural fit at that point. But I also got the opportunity to see that really wonderful collaboration. So I'm going to pull up my screen. 1 second. That's going. And just provide a quick overview of what Resilient DC is, which is the primary thing that my team works on. I, as the Chief Resilience Officer, oversee the Resilience Bureau, which is in charge of figuring out how to implement this Resilient DC strategy that came out back in 2019, and is pretty far-reaching in terms of how we think about resilience. And so what that plan is it takes this broad definition of resilience, being sort of thinking about urban resilience as the entire community's ability to really thrive no matter what comes at us, is sort of the big picture definition. And that's recognizing that, we see shocks, we see things that are unexpected, like COVID, like floods, like cyber attacks. And those really do shake our systems and force us into an emergency management position that in some ways is the bread and butter of what HCEMA does, and makes us rethink how our city operates in many ways often. But we also have these ongoing sort of slower moving stressors. And those are the slow burning things that impact our city every day. So it's the fact that our infrastructure is really old, so that when we have a shock, it's less likely to succeed. It's the fact that we have economic inequality in our city. And so when we have a shock, we see the disproportionate impacts on some populations versus the other. And I think the thing that's new about moving a resilience bureau into an agency like HCEMA is the ability to start really focusing in on some of those stressors that become threat multipliers when we have the shocks. And so that's a lot of what my team sits and thinks about. And that has a lot of overlaps with public health. So the actual Resilient DC strategy is organized mainly into these 68 initiatives. And those are categorized into a few different chapters. So there's 2 cross-cutting themes: resilient rivers, thinking about how we can use our waterfront areas to really think about opportunities, because those are some of the last parts of the district that aren't built up. And so have some of our neighborhoods that we are building from scratch, which is pretty rare in the district. It's also an area of a lot of risk because of flood systems. Equity and governance, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then the main chapters are inclusive growth. So how do we think about economic inequality, affordable housing, job opportunities, and economic growth in all of the policies that we're doing? Climate action, how do we think about climate change and how that's impacting the city? Smarter DC, which is all about technology. COVID kind of changed it to be more about the digital divide than how it was originally written. But there's also things in there about the automation of work, and about making sure that all of our district services are in the internet and offered in ways that people can actually access them. And then Safe and Healthy Washingtonians is our chapter really on public health and public safety. So that's a really broad overview of the plan. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details, but happy to answer questions. But I did want to talk about some of the data that underlies that plan that has really important public health implications and is driving some of the work that we're doing. So this first map is showing the life expectancy in the different census tracts throughout the district. And I think this is one of the most striking statistics that we have about the district population. In Woodley Park, which is one of our wealthiest neighborhoods, the life expectancy is 83 to 91 years old, whereas in parts of Ward 7 and Ward 8 and some of the other pockets in the district, it's 63 to 70, which is a huge difference in expected life based solely on what census tract, what zip code you grow up in. And this does, to a certain extent, map onto where we have hospital resources. So you'll see this map is showing our hospital centers. Also, even I would say the one hospital that we have over in those communities where the life expectancy is lower is not the full service hospital that those communities need. So one of the big projects and initiatives in the district is to bring a full service hospital into those communities. And so that's just one example. Sort of feeding into this is a map of asthma emergency room visits. And you see that it tracks really closely. So the larger red dots are once again those life expectancies, so larger dot, longer life expectancy. Here you see the darker green is where we have more asthma emergency visits. That tracks very closely. And that is because of histories of industrial uses and air quality issues in some of those neighborhoods that are under-resourced. Similarly, you see the same with educational attainment, those places where we have the fewest people that are graduating from high school are in those communities with the life expectancies that are the lowest. Same for unemployed populations. It really continues to track in all of the statistics that we're looking at. And we kind of expect that these trends aren't just here to stay, that if we don't do something about it, we could continue to see these inequities move forward and even grow. So when looking at the risk of jobs that are likely to be automated and people are to lose their jobs, that also tracks with the industries, mostly in our lower income neighborhoods where the majority of people are people of color. And same with how household housing cost burden. So if, while if you look just on paper, the rents in these lower income neighborhoods are cheaper, they are a much larger proportion of somebody's income. So we're seeing much more housing burden in these same communities that are overstressed and overburdened already. And then it even comes to access to public transportation. So those communities where are also in the dark purple here are the communities that have least access to public transportation, bus, rail. They're also communities where people are less likely to own cars. So it really stretches in so many different ways that you see these deep inequities. And then when it comes to dangers from natural hazards, we also see that much of these communities are where our floodplains are, and are also areas of our community that have that hold on to heat more because of the urban heat island effect, which basically is because of all of the concrete in the city. These neighborhoods trap and hold on to heat and stay warmer and stay hotter than the surrounding communities that have more green space and parks and trees. So really the maps just continue to tell us that the same communities over and over again tend to be overburdened and are where our risks are the most. And so, as I mentioned at the top of this presentation, one of the themes in the Resilient DC strategy is that we have to lead with equity and governance across all things that we do. And we have to recognize that there's structural and institutional racism that has created the maps that you all just saw. That's not just happenstance. It didn't happen randomly. It is actually government policies over decades and decades and decades that created where we are now. It's policies that said that we're going to divide certain communities with freeways and we're not going to have freeways go through other communities, that we're going to invest in public infrastructure like rail lines in certain communities and we're not investing in that in others, that we have jobs programs and quality schools in some neighborhoods and not others. And so as we're thinking about emergency management and responding to things, we have to be aware of these existing inequities so that our response matches the needs of those communities. And we have to know what communities we're walking into and make sure that we are going in ahead of time thinking about what inequities are going to happen, like what we saw during COVID, where certain communities saw a lot more COVID, certain communities needed a lot more services in terms of trying to get people to trust vaccines and all of those pieces. We need to be able to understand these communities at that deep level, not just these maps. We actually have to go and talk to people and know who lives there and have good relationships with the community-based organizations. And then as we're thinking about recovery and sort of long-term investments in the city, making sure that we're starting in the places that need it most. And if we can solve issues like climate change and flooding issues in those communities that are most impacted, then we're going to have solutions that are going to work elsewhere. So we might as well focus our energies where disproportionate impacts are. So in terms of kinds of policies that we're looking at, one policy that a lot of cities, including the district, are exploring is this concept of resilience hubs, which is recognizing that a lot of communities don't look to the government first when they need resources during disasters, during normal times. They look to their churches or to a community-based organization that they really trust. And so how do we work with those organizations and resource them to better serve their communities, and not fight and try and play against our community-based organizations, but actually just invest in them and resource them and make sure that they're able to maintain power, to not flood in the event, so that they can actually serve the community that they already have relationships with. Another thing is just thinking about neighborhood design from the beginning. We just put out as a district a plan called Keep Cool DC, which outlines strategies for combating the urban heat island. And a lot of that is on building design and public education. How do we just get people to know how to cool off their homes effectively? How do we, every time we build a building, make sure that we're putting a cool or green roof on it, that we're putting in trees and increasing our canopy so that we're not making the problem worse and we're actually bringing the temperature down. So that's the kind of policy that we're exploring. And then a final policy is we're working on a microgrid at the new hospital that is serving that community that I had mentioned at the top, is really lacking a hospital. And so there's a brand new hospital through our mayor. We are being able to build. It's going to be a 136 bed hospital with a full trauma care, full maternal health center, full ambulatory center. So it's going to be a huge service to this community, but we also want to make sure that that hospital is cutting edge in all the ways. And one of those is ensuring that it can have backup power in all situations. So we were able to get a grant through FEMA to build a microgrid, which essentially brings in multiple sources of power. So it brings in power from the utility, it brings in power from a combined heat and power plant, it brings in power from solar and a battery, and then can choose based off of what is cheapest, based off of what is needed, what energy source it's pulling from, and always make sure that it has a certain amount of reserve. So if the larger grid goes out because of a power outage, because of a cyber attack, that the hospital can disconnect from that larger grid and has that reserve power and can stay online. And that microgrid is not actually just serving the hospital in this case, it's also serving the building where HCEMA currently sits, where our 911 call center is, and a men's shelter. So it's also serving other really important critical functions. So that's just a little bit of a taste of what we're doing through Resilient DC, but I'll pause there because I know we want to keep this conversational and hear what your questions are.
So I've got a couple, unless I see any hands up, I'll let you guys go first. I'm pretty familiar with the old St. E's building because I work at Coast Guard headquarters, so that's where we moved. So, okay, I still haven't seen hands up. One question that I have is looking at your slides and hearing some of the words that you guys both used in your presentation. When students are looking for emergency management jobs or like preparedness sorts of jobs, should they be also looking for not just public health, but public safety and resilience? Are there other keywords outside of emergency management that you would recommend people put in their job search?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we find even in our internship program is that a lot of people have a fairly narrow view of what emergency management is. And so I am interested in finding students with cross-disciplinary backgrounds. I am interested in working with people that really understand how to do development in the city, how to think about people and do good community education engagement work, how to understand the intersections of public health and emergency management, because that's so much of what we do. And so you mentioned that you have students coming from all walks of life and all backgrounds, and that really is an asset. And I would, as your students and as all of you are looking for jobs, really try and brag about that, because it's something that we are looking for every day.
Yeah, I would just add, if you haven't been following already, there's a pretty big trend in the emergency management community for hashtagging any job posts with EM jobs. Almost everyone does it when they post, so that's a great resource if you want to see openings across the country in the emergency management field. And I definitely echo what Melissa said about that, like cross-disciplinary approach. Neither of us are what you would consider traditional emergency managers that didn't go to school with the intent of becoming emergency managers. I like to think of emergency management in two ways, and I think it's true, especially at our agency. It's just really complex problem solving and project management. And so whatever sort of background or professional lens that you bring, if you bring a spirit of sort of collaboration and looking at different ways to solve complicated problems, and being able to do the project management, not just from like managing timelines, but really the stakeholder engagement pieces, the communication strategies, and all of those things are effective or are necessary to run an effective project. That's a lot of what this field is. And so if you want to bring your public health or medical, or I was a communication major, I thought I was going to do TV broadcasting. Like if you bring all of that to the table, really what will then set you apart is your technical expertise, because then you can provide, real life or educational or experience to flavor the conversations. But as long as you know how to do that in sort of a complex, ever-changing, ever-evolving environment, I think is what's the most important thing to be ready for. And then whatever sort of technical skill set you bring is really just a bonus.
Great, thank you. I'm still looking for hands, so I have a couple, so I'll just keep going. But if you've got a question, feel free to jump in, because I'm trying to anticipate your guys' questions and ask them. So one question that I get a lot is, how can you get an emergency management job or like an entry public health job if you don't have any sort of practical experience? So a two-part question is, one, how do you get your foot in the door? And also a second question is, are there things like I've told students, if you're part of a church or if your kids go to school, reach out to them. And, if you're in Florida, do a hurricane preparedness talk. Or we had a nurse who I said, she was active in her church. I said, go to your church and do an info session on the COVID vaccine. I was like, these are known entities, so it's not like you're cold calling people. So those are two ideas that I've given to students. But are there other ways that you can recommend that students kind of get some sort of practical experience with that they can use to apply for a job without actually like having a position?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind. Most communities have those community emergency response teams or CERT teams. That's a great way to get involved. They normally provide a lot of, just free training on a regular basis that's based in sort of your typical emergency management, and that's a good way to get exposed. For students that have that medical background, a lot of cities also have the Medical Reserve Corps. So in the district, that's a big resource when we're staffing First Amendment events, having folks that can, for the July 4th activation, for example, the entire National Mall is filled with people who are there to celebrate the 4th. And we've got first aid stands plopped all around the area because it's the middle of July. There's a lot of heat. You have people who become dehydrated, overheated, all of that stuff. And so our Medical Reserve Corps, a lot of that staff comes from universities, hospitals, and sort of those systems that can just kind of help manage those tents whenever we're having those First Amendment events. I will always do a plug for people who are able to apply for internship programs. They're getting way more popular sort of in the emergency management field. So that's always a good opportunity. And I really like your sort of suggestions of getting involved at your church, at your school, at your, wherever it is. I think there's been a lot of focus and there's a lot of research and information about the importance of emergency preparedness in schools, especially for young children, when it's ingrained in them and they come home and they want to build a kit and they want to talk about it. And it's not rocket science, right? Like how to build a kit and how to be ready for 24 to 72 hours. So even if it was volunteering, going to the school and helping make kits, or, getting, other parents together to help their kids build the kit and take it home, or something like that, I think that shows a lot about the community engagement piece and the understanding of how that preparedness has a positive effect on the emergency management and response, and all of that as a system. And then most of, the FEMA courses, a lot of people take the FEMA courses very seriously as sort of a baseline understanding of what emergency management is. So if it's something that you want to do, like, don't wait till you get the job, like take as many of the online FEMA courses that are available to you, so that even if that's not a career that you've had a lot of experience, you understand the lingo and sort of the structures that people are mostly operating out of, and can maybe work a little bit more seamlessly if you get an opportunity to volunteer or, work part-time in that sort of environment. Melissa, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I echo a lot of what Jerica said. Another organization that you can volunteer with is the Red Cross. They respond to house fires in every community, open shelters, and that can be a really good opportunity to understand how emergency management functions at the local scale. In general, I always joke that I've started every job before I officially started it. As I mentioned, I started working with HCEMA through the COVID response. In my job before that, I started working with the Department of Energy and Environment as a volunteer before they hired me. And so often it's just finding projects and people who are doing interesting work and seeing if there's a way that you can get involved. And then they know who you are, they trust you, they know that you're a hard worker, they know that you're smart. And when something opens up, they're very likely to send it your way. So as much as you can, just find ways to get involved. It's always good if you can find a way to get paid too, which is where the internship program, like what we offer, is a really great opportunity.
Is your internship program available for just current students, or can it be people who have already graduated, or what are the eligibility requirements?
So right now, our intern program is open to undergraduate, juniors and seniors, or graduate students. We're hoping to, by the fall of 2023, pilot sort of a fellowship program. So for recent graduates or people who are trying to enter the field, we had the program years ago, and there was a little bit of a disconnect between what interns were doing from what fellows were doing. And there was a pretty big pay disparity between interns and fellows. So we want to make sure that we get that right before we roll that out again. I think the fellows will kind of have a rotation around different divisions and bureaus in the agency, and maybe be assigned to work on certain projects versus the interns being just assigned to one place. But that's where we are right now. I do know some other emergency management shops that do have fellowships and are looking for more full-time folks. And so I can definitely reach out to some of our colleagues and kind of pull a few names together of organizations that might have those opportunities available sooner than we do.
If you could, that would be great. I would definitely share that with our students and graduates. Would one of the two of you be able to talk about how your office interacts with the Metro PD?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier DC Health being a core agency that we interact with all the time. At HCEMA, we say we have like our big 8 agencies that we interact with constantly. DC Health being one of them, the police department, the fire department, public works, transportation, human services are some of the ones that come up. So from sort of day to day, we have a lot of initiatives. The district's fusion center, or the intelligence center, works at HCEMA, and it works closely with the intelligence functions at the MPD. We also have a newer program that's called the Threat Assessment Center. So they're looking for early indicators and warnings of violence in folks in the community. That not, every time you hear about a mass shooting or something like that, you always hear, well, CPS was involved, or they were reported to this person, or the counselor knew, or whatever, but none of that information is ever sort of packaged in a way where the actions could have maybe been prevented. And so we have a new threat assessment center that works very closely with the police department, where if they're collecting viable information about the community or from the community about an individual or a group, then they can work with the police department to adjudicate that information, or maybe do a house call if there's like real concern. That's on a sort of preventive, sort of forward leaning side. On the incident management side, we do a ton of special events in the district. It's still not quite picked up to its original pace since COVID. But as you can imagine, all of those First Amendment events are public safety events. The police department is always out for those events, depending on where it is. There are a number of other police jurisdictions in the district, the U.S. Secret Service, Park Police, National Park Service, that they coordinate with. And so in all that special events planning, from a neighborhood block party all the way up to inauguration or July 4th activation, or a nationals championship parade, we're in constant communication with leadership at NPD for that sort of special event planning, coordination, making sure we're dusting off if we need to do evacuations, or if there's something that happens during an incident, just making sure we're on the same page. So we do a lot with them. I think we've also had some, if I remember correctly, as part of the Resilient DC updates, have had some follow-ups and discussions with NPD about some of the initiatives that they're working on and that strategy.
Yeah, that's right. The Resilient DC touches basically every agency in the entire district. So we end up working with every agency. There's a certain amount of their in the Resilient DC report on gun violence and sort of inequities between communities in terms of public safety. And so we always work with our MPD partners to get updates on what they're doing and making sure that we're working together on those initiatives.
So if you work that closely with all of these other agencies, and if you're talking about problem solving and community engagement, if we've got people that are interested in getting into that emergency management field, and they've got like first responder experience, something like that, but it's not, it wasn't an emergency management job, in your eyes, you would still consider that as experience towards an emergency management role, correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've recently had some interns in the last couple of semesters that did work at American Red Cross. We have one that was a firefighter EMT that recently came through our program. We get a huge variety of students.
Yeah, my intern right now is a graduate student in psychiatry who is really interested in talking about how you do emergency management communications before people are in a place of crisis and getting them prepared. And she's great. Like, that's a perspective that I could never bring.
That's really interesting. That's going to be a good project. Is anybody else? I can keep going. Could you talk a little bit about January 6th?
Yeah, I feel like this is my road show as of lately. So as I mentioned, or you mentioned in the intro, so I was the Emergency Operations Center manager on January 6th. So it was quite a day of events. Our efforts, the emergency management is the lead coordinating agency for response. So there are a lot of components of that on that day. Some big things is that, the DC is part of the National Capital Region. So we're immediately bordered by Virginia and by Maryland. And we have close coordination with those partners. So a good thing to designate or separate for people, which is not always clear, is that January 6th is U.S. Capitol Police. It's on Capitol property. And when I talked earlier about all the sort of police apparatus that are in the district, there's a lot of political geofencing, if you will, about what's district property versus Capitol property versus U.S. Secret Service versus Park Police. And so one of the big misconceptions about January 6th is like, well, why didn't MPD respond sooner? Well, it's not our jurisdiction. So part of what we were doing was talking to MPD very closely and asking them what they needed. What police resources could we pull in? Luckily, the district was postured that day for January 6th. So MPD was, everywhere around the Capitol and able to respond quickly when asked. But we also coordinated state resources from Virginia, Maryland, and New Jersey that came to support. The city still has to figure out how to function in response. So emergency declarations, whether or not we're going to issue curfews, public messagings and warnings, especially to the neighborhoods. It's an incredibly residential area that's right outside of the Capitol. So talking to those homeowners and people who live in those communities about what's going on and what safety protocol, figuring out passageways in and out of the city, making sure those remain open for emergency vehicles and emergency response. There's a lot of components of what goes in that, tracking, social media from the intelligence side of the house and seeing if there's the potential for any additional threats or hazards that we have to be mindful of, and then continuing to help support the coordination of those calls and staffing the days leading and after. We were activated on January 6th because of some of the intelligence that we were getting leading up to the inauguration. We weren't full activated like we would be for inauguration, but we had sort of a partial staff starting as early as the 4th, actually. So we were there at the ready. Someone came in and said the Capitol was being stormed, and everyone kind of stopped what they were doing and then immediately went into response mode. So our director was talking to his counterparts at the executive level. Our deputy director was working on the district-wide, like I said, the curfew, the response, emergency declarations. I was working on all the state-to-state resourcing, so getting those different police apparatuses in, but you also have to figure out where they're going to sleep, where they're going to park, where they're going to get their orders from, who they're going to report to at MPD, and in turn, who they'll report to at Capitol Police. And then our chief of operations at the time was handling all the calls from the region. Everyone was calling, offering, can we send someone? Can we do something? And you're trying to figure out what your needs are in the moment, and figure out what help you can take and what help you have to say, we're just not sure yet. So it was a very busy several hours for us, which led to an even busier series of days leading up to inauguration, because the sense of everything had heightened so significantly, because we were just like 14 days out at that point from when the inauguration was. So lots of effort, a very emotionally taxing day, especially because a lot of our staff are Native Washingtonians. So having them respond or have to respond and keep working while they're seeing, their city sort of go through this very visceral event, is something that can't be understated about sort of like the mental health aspect of the type of work that we're doing, especially on a day like January 6th.
Could you actually talk a little bit more about that? Because the presentation that, and I really wish that I had looked it up before tonight, but the presentation that I saw that you gave, you talked a lot about that and looking out for the emergency managers and the public health people that are working for you. And I really like the focus that you put on that and how you had explained that. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of this field?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we activated for COVID on March 8th of 2020, and we were working at a pace at that point that was, we moved our EOC. So we didn't just like go and roll into our normal space. We physically moved to a different space. People had to get a new commute to work, figure out where to park, figure out how to make this space that wasn't configured to house 200 people that were in and out of the building every day to do this response. And a lot of that was on our staff. Nobody else ran an EOC. So our teams were working 18-hour days. We kept trying to change sort of the schedule and the pace so that people wouldn't be completely burned out, but also keeping the team separate, because if someone got COVID, we didn't want that to impact the other team. So we tried everything, like 4 days on, 3 days off, 4 days on, 4 days off, 18-hour days, 14-hour days. It was, people were so over like the schedule change, but we were just trying to figure out how to get the right balance. And then you kind of get through a little bit of a rhythm with COVID, even though it's still very much, a big thing that's happening and we're figuring it out. And you get into spring, and then you have George Floyd and all the protests that follow. And then we had severe weather that September, where we had record flooding in a couple of wards in the district. And it just kept feeling like it was piling on. And at one point, not at one point, at many times, we kept saying, well, if we can just get to inauguration, we can take a break. If we can just get to inauguration. And it was hard. It is hard because emergency managers, especially the ones that work for our agency, are very dedicated to the mission. It's hard to tell people to turn off your phones, don't answer, disconnect. I have to fuss at Melissa all the time, like, stop answering your phone, you're on vacation. It's a hard mindset because these people are dedicated to public service. So some of the small things that I've been trying to advocate for is, people have been eager to get rid of telework. We have to keep telework. That's the only time people have to kind of do work in their pajamas or get their laundry done or whatever else they need to do to kind of have that sense of normalcy. Being really good at sort of cross training people so that folks can afford to leave and have certainty that the job that they think is very important is going to be done well when they're not there. It's interesting because a lot of our staff, I ran some numbers a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of, there's a bad rap about millennials. 61% of our workforce are millennials. And so when you think about, they don't stay at jobs long, they don't do this, they don't do that. We haven't seen that, but we also are in competition with 100% telework jobs or 100% consulting jobs. And so finding the sweet spot of encouraging rest and giving people sort of latitude to do the work the way that they need to. Maybe one day it'll bite me as a manager, but I don't really care where you are and I don't care what obscure hours you work as long as you get what you need to have done. And for me, that's one small thing that I can do to try to kind of help people with balancing their day and their family lives and their personal lives and whatever else is going on. And it's something that as an agency, we're really trying to figure out. The balance of the mission keeps getting complicated. Texas has been dropping off migrants in DC for months, and we have been wrapping around, helping the Department of Human Services set up a migrant center and processing all of these people and making sure that they get somewhere safely and get the resources they need. And if you had told us in 2020 that we were going to be doing resource requesting and coordination for migrants, we would have all looked at you crazy. But the situations keep changing, and as you do a good job, then you get 7 more good jobs to do. And we can't slow down the pace of that response. And so I personally, and I know a lot of managers and folks at the agency are always just trying to figure out how to keep mental health and people's sort of work-life balance at the forefront, even though the work that we're being asked to do continues to increase. And Melissa, I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but it's a constant sort of pull and push.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I think that all of the work that we do is important. Everything we do is important, but not all of it is an emergency. And so there's just a constant need to distinguish between what is emergent, what would require a 12-hour day, and what is, you got as much as you could do by 4:30 today, and your laptop has to close because you have other stuff to do, and it's okay if it takes until tomorrow. And constantly sort of reinforcing that, and also having people plan for their vacations, right? So one of the things that I have my team do is that when they go on vacation, that they have somebody else on the team who is their designee, who gets all of their emails, who is briefed ahead of time about what possibly could happen and they might need to deal with, and is prepared so that when that person is on vacation, they're on vacation. They're not dealing with that last minute email or other things that might be coming their way. And so it is a culture within our agency that all of the managers are tasked with helping their team figure out how to get away and how to take that mental health time that they need.
I remember I was at Coast Guard headquarters at our old headquarters building during Deepwater Horizon. And, when when that exploded, there were a lot of people from the DC area that were working crazy hours at headquarters, which means because they were local, they were driving back and forth, like they didn't have hotel rooms. And one of our captains went home and was eating a bowl of cereal, like leaning back, and fell asleep with the bowl of cereal on his chest. And his wife said, "You're not going to work tomorrow." And he's like, "I have to." And she said, "You can't stay awake long enough to eat a bowl of cereal. You are going to kill yourself, and then you're going to be no good to anyone. So you are staying home." And he listened to her. And I mean, it was good because it kind of like really showed, like, wait a second, this has been going on. I think that we were about 3 weeks in at that point, and it was like, people need to just take a step back and just get some sleep, because nothing that we're doing here is going to close the well by like tomorrow morning. Everybody needs to take care of themselves.
We did
one
that
question
during, I saw there was another question. I was just gonna say, we did that during COVID too. We would tap someone, or we all almost had like a walking buddy where during lunchtime or at 4 o'clock or whatever, you just grab someone and say, "Hey, like, let's go outside. Let's walk around the block a couple times. Like, let's get some fresh air." Because we were all so in the thick of it. And then a lot of people were terrified, right? Like at the very beginning of COVID, we weren't wearing masks. We weren't social distancing. We weren't doing any of that. I tell everybody, it's jokingly, but it was serious. Like every 3 hours, everybody put on gloves, and we got these strong bleach wipes, and we played Outcast So Fresh and So Clean, and we just like wiped every surface in the EOC. Like we did that until we social distanced, until we wore masks, because there just wasn't the guidance in the beginning. And so not only are you dealing with people being physically exhausted because of the hours and the time, but it's the mental strain of, am I going to get someone sick when I get back home? And, how do I avoid that? So those small walks, or those small moments, became really important. And we were able to really make that a habit. I still see people doing that now. And in our new EOC facility that we have, there's just a lot more areas for wellness and rest. We have our old EOC faces no outdoor windows, so we have natural sunlight now. We have wellness rooms. We have like spaces where you can congregate and eat lunch that's not in the EOC at the desk that you've been sitting at for 18 hours. So it's a lot of small things like that that I think make a big difference, and at least feeling like you have an opportunity to disconnect.
Nice. So the question that you saw was, with the recent attacks on various electrical substations, are you guys prepared if power were to be taken out for a few days in DC?
Yeah, so that's something that my team is actively working on. In our new EOC, we're certainly getting generators, and in our existing building, as I mentioned before, a microgrid is something that we are working on. Here, I'll share my screen really quickly again, just to illustrate what a microgrid is, because it's not the most intuitive thing. But basically how a microgrid works is, think of it as having a central computer that runs some sort of algorithm where it's optimizing for whatever it is that we care about. And then it has multiple energy sources that are going in. So in the case of our microgrid that we're developing, it has a CHP system. So basically a giant generator system that is also taking all of the waste heat and recycling that in. So it's a very efficient gas system. It also has solar that charges a battery, and that battery is there for if we lose power, that we can use that battery. It also has our utility feeding in. And so the system, the algorithm that it's set up for is basically optimizing resilience. So it's saying that we want to make sure that that battery is always charged and ready to go. We want to make sure that we basically know that we can produce all of the energy that we need if our utility goes offline through that CHP system. And that on a sunny day, it can be supplemented by solar. And then if we ever really needed it, we've got that battery. And if for some reason all of that were to fail, we've also got this backup generator. And so there are basically 5 lines of defense that will mean that that building can have power in addition to the hospital and the other off-takers of that microgrid in any situation.
I think also from sort of a programmatic perspective, we are an agency, and I didn't realize this until COVID, is HCEMA has always had distributed laptops. I didn't realize how many other district agencies relied on their staff having desktops. And so when COVID happened, I know nationwide there was like a huge shortage with Dell and all these other providers because everyone was trying to, buy laptops so that they could go remote. And we had just done a coop drill the 3 or 4 days before we ended up activating to make sure everybody's VPN worked and they had access and all of that stuff. And so even from a space perspective, if the district was to lose power for a couple of days or hours or whatever the case may be, we also know now, based on the fact that we moved to the health department, that if we have our laptops, we can move anywhere. We could run the EOC from our homes or wherever else we might be able to have power, because we have shown that we can sort of disconnect and our EOC can go on the road. So it's great to have all of the backups because you invest a lot of money in these spaces and these operating centers, and you want them to work and you want them to do the things that you do. But we also have a lot of confidence before and even more now that our staff can pick up and set up an EOC anywhere. And so that gives me a lot of confidence that our agency would be prepared, whether that means we get to stay in our physical space or not.
I know we're closing in at 9 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but does anybody have any last questions? This has been such great information. I really, really appreciate both of you coming and spending this time with us. I don't see any last hands up. Do either one of you have any like final pieces of advice that that you can provide?
Just be open to opportunities as they come up, and raise your hand when you have a chance to volunteer for things. None of us knew COVID was coming. None of us really knew that January 6th would go the way it did. And there will be something that will be an opportunity. So just find a way to get involved in the things that you're interested in. And that will open up doors, I promise.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I say it, and it's probably not a great thing to say publicly all the time, but like emergency management really isn't rocket science. And so don't let anyone make you feel intimidated by, well, I haven't been in the field long enough, so what can I contribute? If you know how to ask tough questions, if you know how to connect people and ideas, if you raise your hand, as Melissa said, for sort of the hard things and are willing to sort of get your hands dirty, there's definitely a place for you in emergency management, wherever that might be. So much of my job, and someone said to me today, a surprise Jerica is not a happy Jerica when someone has like just dropped something on me. Because the number one question I ask is like, why are we doing that? Like, is this what we want to do? And it's depending on who you are and how long you've worked with me, it's just really, I want us to do things differently. I don't want us to do something because that's the way that we've always done it. And having sort of that healthy curiosity and following it up with like, we could potentially do it this way, or solutions, or I know someone somewhere else that tried it this way, is a lot of what this is, because there's no one size fits all. Melissa went through a bunch of different factors in her presentation that we could solve for a very specific problem. And then one factor kind of related to that problem can change the entire scenario where we're solving for that problem again. So don't be intimidated, raise your hands, ask questions, challenge the process, take those volunteer opportunities. And really, especially if you guys are getting back involved in IEM, like use that network. We have someone that I present with a couple of times who he is the king of LinkedIn and connecting to people and seeing opportunities on LinkedIn. And we give him a hard time in person, but it's really been invaluable. Some of the people that he's connected our agency to, and things that we've been able to learn from other agencies and share with other agencies. So use that network too if you're interested, and that hashtag EMJobs is a great place to start looking if you're interested in getting involved.
I've shared some of the things that you've posted, like about your internship program. We've got an emergency management LinkedIn group for our program, and we also have a public health preparedness one. So I follow you guys on LinkedIn, and I've shared some of those things. So I appreciate all the great social media stuff that you put on there.
Yeah, and we just got a new social media manager a couple weeks ago, so I feel like I've seen our pace of what we've been posting kick up. She's been really great. So we're excited to share more, especially, in the next year or so. And if there's anything, other parts of our agency that you guys are interested in learning from, if you want to talk to someone at DC Health, we know a few people. So we're happy to help connect you guys to anyone that would be, a good part of your webinar series.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And if there's, I've asked this of other speakers as well. If there is a project, or if you're looking for people, feel free to reach out, because we can share that in our student and graduate network. And I know that you have a lot of people that are seeking you out, but if you're trying to, fill a position, fill a need, feel free to reach out, and we will share it widely with our network.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our strategic goals is actually we want to be able to partner with more colleges and universities, especially in areas where we're trying to do sort of like more research and data collection and that sort of thing. And so we will definitely take you guys up on that offer. I'm sure there are about 37 things that Melissa could think of that another set of public health minds would be helpful.
Well, actually, I would definitely love to talk to you guys offline about that, because our students also do a capstone project as the final course of our program, and a lot of students want to do something that's got practical application and not just like a box check. They really want to be able to have it make a difference. So if there are projects that you think could be easily done in the span of one semester, or even two, because we also have an independent study option. So if there are 1 or 2 semester projects that we could definitely partner with that, and I could work with students that are looking for project ideas, and we could help you get some of those things done.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. We'll definitely connect on that.
Yeah, that's great to know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And both Melissa and Jerica put their email addresses in the chat. So if you are looking to touch base with them, they are there. I also did hear back about our IAEM meeting that is not happening this month. So forget everything I said about next Tuesday. I believe we will reconvene either in January or February, but check your email, and there will be updates sent on that. So thank you so much, Jerica, Melissa. This was so much great information. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And everybody who's finishing up their semesters, best of luck with your final projects, and enjoy your break. I hope everyone has a very happy holiday season, and we will see everyone back in February.
Thank you for having us. We enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Bye, everyone.